Good morning. I'm going to call to order the Pierce County Council and Monday study session for February 3rd, 2025. The time is 11 a.m. and all members are present. We have several items that we're going to go over today. We're going to start with our legislative update and we'll kick it off with Mr. Taylor.
Thank you. Good morning. So today, Mr. Shaw is present to provide the week 4 briefing to the council. Within your packet, you'll note there's some additional material that you haven't seen in prior briefings. The most notable is a document that's titled Bills of Interest. It's got 35 bills noted on it. It includes information on a position, if known, that Wasac and other counties have taken on these particular bills that are of interest to Pierce County, and where a Pierce County position is known, that's indicated as well. So I think of the 35 bills, you'll see that 10 of them have Pierce County positions noted. This is the first time that it's been presented to the council, so it may, there may be some changes necessary as Mr. Shaw and others receive feedback, but I just want to highlight that particular item within the document or within the packet. The other thing that I want to note is in regard to capital requests. As was discussed at the study session last week, some of the capital requests that were included in the priorities resolution that the council adopted needed additional work. And so you briefly discussed that with staff last week. The executive this morning provided some additional information to members that if you haven't had an opportunity to see it, it's in your email box that provides some additional detail about changes to some projects that weren't quite ready to go, and then the addition of additional park projects. So that's not in this packet. It just came through this morning, but I would encourage you to take a look at your email in that regard, and then staff can certainly follow up and answer any questions that you may have regarding those capital requests. So with that quick background or introduction, I'll turn things over to Mr. Shaw.
Thank you for that. Mr. Shaw.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the council. Welcome to week 4 of the legislative session. To give you a sense where we are just in process, there is still about a little less than 3 weeks till the first committee cutoff, which is the 21st of February. So the focus is still on the policy bills, but we're hitting that transition phase where a lot of the big bills that we talked about in week 1, week 2 are now moving into the fiscal committees. So I'll hit a couple of those that are major bills that are now having their fiscal committees. We've already seen the first deadline to get our transportation projects into the Senate. That was last Friday. The House, I believe their deadline is the 7th. And with regards to capital projects, the 21st of this month. So we're kind of moving through that. With that being said, I'll just touch on a little bit more what Mr. Taylor said about the other list, the bills of interest. Every Thursday evening, all the county, well, not all, but most of us, the county lobbyists, we have representatives from the Juvenile Justice, we have the Prosecutors Association lobbyists there. We sit and we look at the upcoming hearings for this week. We do this every Thursday evening. And so what I'm giving you is kind of summarizes where they're landing on certain bills. Not all these bills are pertinent to Pierce County. There's one that deals with GMA deadlines that only impacts Spokane and about 8 other counties east of the mountains. But I just want to give you a sense of what's out there outside what I give you during these brief overviews. So let's jump into what's coming up this week. In appropriations today, the rent control bill 1217 is getting moved from the policy. Now it's in the fiscal committee, it's in appropriations. Also in Ways and Means today is 5060. That's the bill we talked about where the $100 million for law enforcement, that's now moving to Ways and Means. So it's going to have its hearing today. Excuse me. Sorry. There is one policy bill that I've highlighted. It's a bill deals with, well, there's actually 2 bills. This is a smaller bill on public defense. It would help train and get more paralegals into the system. So I've signed it in favor of that. But the big bill is 1592. That's the bill that the County Association drafted and worked with the Office of Public Defense on, Public Defender Association. that would have the state take 50% of the cost of indigent defense going back, I think, figuring out a figure going back, a look back over 4 years, starting in 2024. So that's the first hearing. It will be in the Civil Rights and Judiciary Committee, so the Policy Committee. I believe Executive Mello intends to testify as part of a county association panel. So it's the first step. That's one of the bigger hearings. There is another bill, 1582, that I know Councilmember Denson is very familiar with, that deals with childcare siting in existing buildings. So that is a hearing at 1:30. And so I guess the question is, would you like me to sign in Pierce County, or would you like to sign in your individual capacity? I just thought I'd better check with you at this point.
Councilmember Denson?
Thank you. Well, I think signing in as Pierce County would be most significant, right? So if there's no objections, that would be fantastic.
Wonderful. Thank you. 1428 is a bill I mentioned earlier. It's kind of the House version of that 5060 bill of the 100 million. This is the House's approach, which is to increase the county criminal justice assistance account and the city assistance account by 50%. That seems to be how the House wants to proceed. So that has a hearing in the Appropriations Committee on the 5th. There's a variety of other bills on our tracking list. I won't go through them all. The tracking, our watch list is probably much longer than I'd like it to be at this point. It's about 5 pages. One of the bills is 1650, which deals with airports and REIT flexibility. That bill has not yet been set for hearing, but it's in House Finance and it's a fiscal committee. So it has an extra week for deadlines. So I'm not as worried about that. And I'll be pursuing trying to get that hearing on that bill. Our county ferry bill is sitting in House Rules. It came out of committee without a no vote. So I'm going to try to work with leadership to get it onto the consent calendar. It's what they vote on when they're having their coffee in the morning. And hopefully get that on its way. With that, I think that's a quick overview of where we're at. There's a lot more bills, of course, on our list, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for the overview and the new document that kind of helps track where you're signing in support and where the county is signing in support, especially with some of our other elected officials. Questions for Mr. Shaw this morning?
Wonderful.
I have one. Is 1391, which is about youth diversion. And I was trying to figure out if there were impacts to county budgets and if WASAC was tracking that one. So just flagging that one. I think I have the right number, 1391. Does that sound familiar at all? It's improving diversion for youth.
Yeah, I'll check on that one. Get back to you. No, I'm not seeing it.
I can send you an email as
Oh,
well.
yeah, I'm sorry.
They've only dropped like 1,100 bills, so I don't know why you're having a hard time finding them.
I have to be, I've been through a bunch of sessions and talking to my fellow lobbyists. We're exhausted. There are so many bills being introduced and their pace of hearings has been such that I thought I was just getting old. But apparently it was other folks as well. So I feel a bit better about it. 1391, yes, it is set for a public hearing on the 5th. So I'll keep that tracked. And yeah, I don't believe on this bill, when it was brought up during our Thursday night gathering, I don't believe anyone raised any objection to it.
Okay. Okay. I just know that we've struggled with the need to improve opportunities for youth to be diverted to, and the way we fund public safety there's some hands tied with how we can fund some of those programs. So if they're saying counties do more, great. How do I do more? And there's that push and pull between youth in general. So just was wondering if that tension was being felt otherwhere.
I think this is a bill. I think we're all going to be looking at the fiscal note when it comes out. I can share, I met with some of the budget writers, and what I told you'll see on transportation, for instance. Tomorrow, you'll probably see the road usage charge bill. That's been talked about for a number of years now, but this is the first bill I think we'll see. And I expect, talking to Representative Phi, that he'll be introducing it tomorrow. We'll see how that goes. But what I'm hearing is towards probably end of next month, they will bring out their transportation budget proposal. It will be a budget proposal that assumes no additional revenue. And will kind of give us an idea of how many projects will be put on pause, which projects will just no longer be considered going forward. And then I think later you will see perhaps a book 2 bill that will say, hey, this is what we could do if we had more revenue, whether it's fee increases, whether it's the RUC bill, what have you. Talking to the majority leader in the Senate on Friday, he said, expect this month to see a lot of bills introduced that will kind of bring the reality of what the budget will look like without additional revenue. When Governor Inslee left, his budget that came out was based on a certain amount of new revenue, whether it was B&O tax increases, wealth tax, what have you. There were documents, though, that would show what the cuts would be. And I think you're going to see that picture being drawn as this month starts, as we transition from the policy to the fiscal.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your work. Appreciate everything you're doing for us. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Shaw.
Thank you.
And Mr. Taylor, I'm going to let you introduce our next.
All right. Thank you. So with us today is Dale Learn from Gordon Thomas Honeywell Government Relations. Mr. Learn is our federal contractor to help interface with Washington, D.C. and federal legislative activities. This is the first time I believe this is the first time he's spoken to the council this year, at least in a study session format. So I've asked Mr. Learn to just provide kind of a high-level introduction, high-level overview of what he sees this year federally. Within your packet, there is a summary of early executive orders that have been released by the President's administration that Gordon Thomas Honeywell prepared last week. That was supplemented with some information regarding U.S. Department of Transportation actions to implement executive orders that was added to your packet this morning. What you will not see in your packet is the executive order related to the pause on federal grants and assistance. As I believe members are aware, that was rescinded. Activity still continues in relation to that, but the executive order itself is not within the packet. So with that really quick introduction, I see Mr. Learn is ready to go. And so Chair, I'll turn things over to Mr. Learn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Learn. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Well, thank you. Can you hear me well?
We can.
Well, thank you, Hugh. I appreciate that. It's good to see some old faces. I don't mean that in chronological years, but people that I've worked with for some time and some new ones. So welcome, Council Member Ayala and Yambi. Hope to work with you guys more. Good to see you there for that purpose, because there are a couple new faces. I know the rest of the council members. I'll do a little quick overview of who we are and what we've done, what we hope to continue to do for the county. So as most of you may know, Gordon Thomas Honeywell is headquartered just down the street. We have offices in Seattle and DC as well. I joined in the team in 2005, and we had 5 people on our government affairs division, and now we have 35 that do state, federal, and international. And you guys may know some of our state folks. We definitely try to work with them in understanding what's happening in the state when it comes to our federal clients, and state action and state involvement. There's a lot of synergy there. On the federal side, I'm the managing partner of our federal affairs, and then Paul Hoover, who some of you know is my main right-hand guy, and he may interact at time to time with Pierce County I'm from Washington State. I grew up in Renton, moved to DC to go to law school and intended on staying here for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. And been here I think I've been here 30. So although my brother lives in McKenna and my mother unfortunately passed a few years ago, but she lived in Tacoma for, I think, 6 or 7 years near the end of her life. So have a lot of connection personally as well. Our contract is very broad. We started in 2010 with Pierce County. We do all things federal that may or that do or may have a federal nexus. Congress, the administration, we work with our delegation very closely with committees on the Hill that have impact issues important to us. On the executive branch side, we work with agencies on very specific issues. I know I've said this to the council members before, but for the new folks, and they might find it odd, you may even know it, but executive branch agency decision makers don't, unlike Congress, who you're their constituents, your constituents are their constituents. They don't look at you as constituents. So you have to go in when you talk to them about be very specific and be very deep in detail about issues that the county is being impacted by their action or inaction. And we've done that in a variety of ways. But we do policy and funding. We deal with the executive, the council, and the departments. The model has changed back and forth over time. My approach has always been to periodically speak in chambers, but try to once a year come typically in August and then speak to each council member individually. Some council members have been very interested in what the federal government does and interested in interacting with them on a regular basis, and some have been less interested. And I just sort of take the cue of the individual and how they want to deal with that. We deal with a lot of associations and trade associations that involve local government and county issues, including NACO. We know that their annual legislative trip is in early March. I know the executive has shown some interest, and I think some of the council members as well, in doing a series of meetings revolved around that, and we can work with that and trying to make the best use of your time for those that may be coming out to NACO, and if I think Ryan is as well, so we can team up and do that. On 2025, as you mentioned, it's it's a new Congress, it's a new president. I guess it's an old president. It's the first president in 136 years to get reelected in non-consecutive terms, but the Congress is new. We have the House has a historic slim majority for the GOP, and then the GOP retook the Senate, having 53 votes into 47 for the Dems. Really 4-seat majority because the vice president breaks ties. DC overall kind of adjusts to the tone of the new president. I mean, DC certainly rejects change in many ways and how it functions, but the new president definitely has a lot of control, at least in the first year and a half, over how the tone of the city goes. President Trump is definitely not conventional and definitely very aggressive in trying to seek a certain tone on how this city functions and how our policy and politics function. In 2017, he was aggressive then, and he tried very hard, but was kind of, I would say, my opinion, resisted, and the city essentially successfully resisted him. And in 2025, I mean, he's trying again very hard, and we'll see. I mean, he's being very aggressive about trying to change the tone and how things go here. More practically, the fiscal year 25 bill is still pending. The way we work on the federal side is we deal with the budget the year before the budget is implemented. Ideally, you finish by September 30th with the appropriations process, and begin the fiscal year on October 1st. We haven't, I think, since I came to this town to work in and around Capitol Hill in 1997, we've only done that a couple times. In the last 3 years, we've, for lack of a better term, bled into the fiscal year in which it was supposed to be implemented. And last 2 years where we finished the business of the omnibus appropriations in March of the year of that fiscal year. And right now, the continuing resolution is for March 14th. Because of the freeze, which I'll talk about in a little bit, we're having a hard time coming to agreement, Democrats and Republicans, on top line numbers for fiscal year 25. So I do anticipate the budget, which we have several items, including 4 earmarks and several of our partners in the county that have other monies in that appropriations bill pending. I do believe we'll finish sometime in March, maybe later in March. With that, as far as 2026, the president has intended the typical process is for the president in early February to submit a budget request, and then for the House and Senate to produce what's called budget resolutions that set the high level parameters of the federal budget for that fiscal year's work, and then for the committees to begin their work. This year, we anticipate President Trump to submit a budget, but also add to that what's called budget reconciliation. It's a process created in the 70s to fight overspending and debt and deficit and to reduce it in quote unquote emergency situations. However, it's become more of a tool to create budget increases or decreases depending on who's in office in the last several administrations. And we do feel that President Trump will do reconciliation. And why? Because in the modern era, to pass legislation out of the United States Senate, you typically need a 60 vote threshold because of the filibuster, and budget reconciliation doesn't requires 50+1. So we feel that the budget resolution, as well as the requested budget by the president, will have a reconciliation package, will likely involve disaster relief for California and other places, extending the tax cuts from Trump's first administration that are about to expire, debt ceiling increase, spending cuts. They're saying potentially even more defense increases. It'll be interesting because reconciliation is intended to focus on saving money, but President Trump has said he doesn't want any cuts to Social Security or Medicare, which are large portions of the federal budget. And to do that and increase defense spending potentially beyond the $1 trillion mark per year, it'd be hard not to eliminate essentially entire departments within the federal government, education, housing, whatever it is, or at least diminish them to such an extent it would be unusable or impractical for, say, local governments to get assistance from them. Congress, of course, will have a say in that, and if the past predicts the future, you're going to see, a situation where both tax cuts and less spending cuts than the administration wants will be included, and we'll just continue to pile onto our debt, approach 45 trillion maybe. Another issue which will be big this year and the next is the surface transportation bill. It's the policy and funding programs that for surface transportation, bipartisan infrastructure law, the IIJA. Every 5 or 6 years, President Biden expanded the programs, both existing programs, created a lot of new ones, and expanded sort of the overall infrastructure buffet, for buffet, as one could say, as far as moving into stuff like broadband and water and things like that. So it'll be interesting to see how this Congress, this administration deals with reauthorizing. We'll probably debate more this year because it doesn't expire until the end of next. So, but that's big for the county and big for a lot of folks. The Farm Bill, trade, with the tariffs that have come down, immigration will be an incredibly big issue, with being a high priority, if not, one could argue, the highest priority for this administration. They have a lot of discretion in this area. As far as local government, it seems a challenge to implement their immigration policies without good cooperation from local government. They would have to hire and spend a lot of money to do it on their own. So I think they will either ask for or require local government to assist them in their immigration policies. Now, the funding freeze, Hugh and Jamie and others in departments have been getting together and trying to determine what immediate and potential future impact a federal funding freeze could have, and trying to figure out, in a rational way what that could look like and will look like, look like. But as they have indicated, the OMB, I think his nomination may be up in the Senate today or tomorrow, but the OMB, acting OMB director and the nominee in the first Trump administration, and this has intended to challenge the Article 1 power of Congress under the U.S. Constitution of spending and enacting law, and then the Impoundment Control Act, which was passed in 1974, outlines procedures for the executive branch to hold back federal funding under certain special circumstances, and they want to have that declared unconstitutional as well. So I think this, and then other issues like birthright citizenship and the 14th Amendment, and some of these issues, they are directly challenging and want to see it go through the courts and see what the courts say. And some of these, like the Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution, spending power of Congress, and the Impoundment Control Act, and the 14th Amendment for sure, courts and the Supreme Court have consistently sided in the analogous case of today with Congress. But this is a different Supreme Court. And however, my gut would tell me, considering that this Supreme Court, the majority have indicated in over the many years that they've practiced law and been judges, that they are strict constructionists. A strict constructionist would only in these cases side with Congress. However, this will test whether they're more political than philosophical. So with all that, I will take any questions that folks may have.
Thank you very much for the overview and the document that's in our packets. For those of you that may have constituents reaching out with questions, it was a really nice summary of some of the executive orders. So thank you for preparing that for us. And I know it's going to be an ever-changing document. So I appreciate the time to outline the ones that are the most pressing. To my colleagues, are there questions for Mr. Learn? Councilmember Morrell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nice to see you, Dale.
Sure.
Have a question pertaining to a environmental and community justice community change grant program that one of our nonprofits have applied for. Do you help track those?
Councilor, yes. If a council member or a department or the executive let me know that there's been an application, certainly I always encourage interacting with Paul and myself to get letters of support and any political support we can get for federal grants. And if that's done, that triggers us watching and making sure that we at least try to follow where it's at. So yes, we don't know all the activity that's going on in the departments, and we encourage them, and if you're directly involved or the executive directly involved, to highlight it to us so that we can put it on our list of things to follow. So yes, in those cases, I should say.
Okay, I will get you an update on that.
Thank you.
I think all the congressional delegation has signed on in support and has submitted letter. I know Governor Ferguson sent a letter the other day in support of this. I think they called it a Northwest Regional Resilient Hub is the title for it. So I will get you information. I just wanted to make sure I knew what the process was to forward you those contacts. So
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for that. And is that something you're interested in the council submitting a letter of support?
I might
Is it
just Yeah, so that way everyone's aware of what's going on. I mean, this is a somewhat long process to get through. This is an EPA grant, I do believe. But yeah, I will get the information to the council members, to the chair, and then you could decide together what to do with that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from my colleagues for Mr. Learn? Okay, I'm giving you wait time because it was a lot, but, oh, Councilmember Morel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to just ask, do you get involved in setting up the agenda for the Washington to Washington kind of
Chamber.
chamber type event that is put on? Do you get involved, Dale?
So in the past, I have. It depends on who the chamber kind of puts on as heading it. I mean, we've had at least in attending some things and in helping scope that, but it's been a few years.
Okay, so you haven't heard anything for this year's, okay. I'll follow up with you on that. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions? Well, Mr. Learn, I know myself and I believe Councilmember Denson will be out in DC. I have not heard from any of my other colleagues for the NACO Ledge Conference. And so we'll try and set up a time to talk with you. And then if there's something that we can do in person with this project, or if there's other things that, or departments that you feel would, a personal touch would be helpful, we will be there and work with your schedule and see what we can get done. So to my colleagues, one of the things that we asked for and started talking about were the impacts to some of these to our ability to do business as a council. Department staff, finance have been working on those numbers, and there's some overview that we can share. One of the things that I was concerned about was the number of employees that we have that are paid with pass-through federal dollars, especially in the human services space, but there are probably some in even our justice space. I'm not 100% sure, or portion of any of the count, like I'm not 100% sure. We blend and braid a lot of funding, as we've all learned. And so understanding what the impacts are, but it's on hold for now. But I think I'm going to consistently be leaning on Mr. Learn and Mr. Taylor and the finance team to really understand those impacts so that we are ready, but also knowing they all have other jobs to do. So we just need to stay nimble and informed, but at the same time, stay focused on what's before us as we move ahead. So, Councilmember Krueger, I saw you leaning towards the light. and then
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just was checking because I believe last week I was asking if the county had put together a list of the agencies that were being affected for the programs. And has that been done, or?
So, Mr. Taylor, can you help answer that question? Because I feel like I'm not going to answer it correctly.
So, council members, there's been preliminary work done. The landscape has shifted a bit, though. I do have some information that I could share with you, council member, individually as far as the work that's been done so far, but I would just caution that it's very much subject to
Work in progress.
change. I'd be hesitant to, rely on it too heavily, because the executive order came out, then some additional guidance related to the executive order came out. Of course, I'm speaking to the financial assistance pause, and then it was rescinded. And so it's a very much a moving target.
Okay,
But I mean, I'd be happy to chat with you about what's been done so
okay,
far.
we can do that. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes, and there were some impacts depending on which level you were looking at. So it's worth understanding. Any other questions on this topic this morning? Not seeing any. So Mr. Learn, thank you very much for your work in the other Washington. Looking forward to seeing you in March, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that brings us to item number 3, which is a review of our council agenda for tomorrow.
Thank you. So this is tomorrow's council meeting agenda. It is amended. We'll start with your consent agenda. Under introduction and scheduling, you have one item, that's O 2025-504. And this is vacating a portion of 154th Street Northwest. This is for referral to EIDC, and you'll be setting the final hearing date on that for March 4th. Under final action on your consent agenda, you have a couple of items. The first is R 2025-103, and this is confirming the appointment of City of Faircrest Council Member Hunter George to the Sound Transit Board. That is for final. Next, you'll see a couple of additions. First is R 2025-104, and this is confirming the reappointment of an existing member to the Tacoma Narrows Airport Advisory Commission. And the last on your consent is R 2025-105, and this is confirming the appointment of one existing member to the Thun Field Advisory Commission. So there is one item under D, and that is the fiscal year 2025 Community Wildfire Defense Grant. This is the Washington State Department of Natural Resources, and Emergency Management has brought that to us. Mr. Boki will explain that to you shortly, and if there's no objection, we will remove that italicized language. Also pending review this morning is another grant though that has been added, and this is the Local Solid Waste Financial Assistance Grant with Washington State Department of Ecology, and this is brought to us from Planning and Public Works. Under other items, there is a motion to authorize the payment of the WASAC membership dues for the year 2025, and that is in the amount of $215,372. So that is on your consent agenda. Moving to section 7, you do have one proclamation tomorrow, and that is a proclamation of the council and executive proclaiming February 2025 as Black History Month in Pierce County. And that was requested by council members Hitchen, Ayala, Denson, and Herrera. You have no resolutions on tomorrow's agenda. You do have a couple items under section 9 ordinances, and first of those is O 2024-572. This is amending chapter 420 of the code entitled Property Tax. This is expanding the time period for requesting a reduction due to a manifest error in the property description and making certain technical revisions. This received a due pass at rules on January 27th. There is one amendment to that, and apologize for not getting that in your packets, but I can easily describe it when we get to amendments. And I'll have that in packets for tomorrow. Number 2 is O 2024-573S, and this is amending section 17C-6230 of the code. This is entitled Fireworks. This is amending the application process for a permit to sell fireworks, amending the criteria for the issuance of a temporary order prohibiting the discharge of consumer fireworks, and extending the hours when the sales and purchases are permitted, and setting an effective date. This received a due pass as substituted in rules on January 27th, and there are 2 amendments to this proposal. And that is your agenda for tomorrow afternoon.
Thank you very much for the overview, and I think we should probably just go over the amendments. Councilmember Denson, do you have something about the agenda in general or the amendments?
It was about the proclamation.
Okay, let's start with that then.
Could we get a list of the folks that we're expecting to be here to accept the proclamation, just so we all are, make sure that everyone that should be invited has been invited?
Okay. And I guess
Sorry.
along that same, oh, do you have a response for that?
I was just going to acknowledge, yes, we will make certain that happens. Now, is that just in relation to this particular proclamation or going forward?
Well, I
All
think going
proclam-
forward
yeah,
would be nice, but I
absolutely.
was thinking in particular this one,
Okay.
just so we all are comfortable with like, okay, we've covered our.
Yeah, I'll converse with Mr. Dominique about that and make certain you have that information.
Thank you.
And that's been a topic of conversation to think about with our processes, because now as we pre-sign on, there's not a lead person who brought it. And so then who's doing the inviting? So if we all sign on to a proclamation and we all invite people, our 20 to 25 minute per proclamation window becomes much larger. So just there, we'll have to think about that as a group, but this was the first try. Is there someone who sponsored that would like to read that one? Just so.
Well, I'm sure we all would, but I wonder if Councilmember Ayala would like to read it, because you haven't read one yet, have you?
She
did you?
read one just recently.
We'll try.
So,
I'm sorry. I would love to do it, but I know that we all would, so.
so it'll either be Councilmembers Densa or Vice Chair Herrera, and they're gonna go play.
We're gonna
like, flip
fight
a
it out
coin or
after.
something. Okay, got it. Okay. Councilmember Krueger.
Thank you, Chair. This is not on the topic of the resolution, is that? Okay. I just was thinking I had seen something about delaying for another week or two the property tax. Or is that maybe the amendment is what's fixing?
Right, do you want me to jump into that? Okay, so that does relate to that. The amendment to 2024-572, the property tax. So there's the big substance of that proposal has to do with extending the time for requesting refunds due to a manifest error in the description of property. There are a couple other technical amendments. The amendment would eliminate those technical amendments at the request of the assessor to give them more time to do a more comprehensive review of their policies and procedures in case there are other technical amendments that they'd like to bring forth. And so that was the request.
That's fine.
Simply just to remove the technical amendments, maybe leave that for a later date and just focus on the manifest error extension of time.
Thank you for that. Councilmember Krueger, is that
That's it.
okay?
Thank you.
Perfect. Any other questions on the agenda before we go to amendments? Okay, we'll start with amendments. And it sounds like we got a preview on the one that's not in the packet.
And I'll have that tomorrow for you in
Okay.
study session.
So Ms. Kelly, will you be briefing on 2024-572?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Andrea Kelly, Council staff. So your first amendment that you have here in regard to 2024 573S is sponsored by Councilmember Denson. And this is after outreach to local fire chiefs. There was a suggestion and feedback that came back about another resource to use in regard to specifically prohibiting or consulting with the executive's office to prohibit or issue an order temporarily prohibiting the discharge of consumer fireworks. Apologize for the long-winded name there, title. So the resource that was provided is the significant fire potential assessment. This is completed and by the National Interagency Coordination Center. And then there is specifically a Northwest Interagency Coordination Center that isolates it and extrapolates that information for our Northwest region. So this assessment has been reviewed and presented to the department who is in full support of it as well, being added.
Thank you. Councilmember Denson, do you have any comments on your amendment?
Ms. Kelly described it perfectly. This resource came from Chief Doan of the Gig Harbor Fire Department, who consulted with his wildlands team. And as Ms. Kelly said, I sent it over to Fire Marshal Rice and he thought it was a great idea. So, and the amendment reads an and or, so he could use both, he could use one or the other, gives him some flexibility, but also puts this in there as a resource, especially moving forward in years to come. So thank you.
Thank you. And then we had a second amendment for this one as well.
Correct. Councilman Amendment 2 essentially is a long-looking amendment, but really what it does is rolls back the request or the proposed extension of that 1 hour of retail sales for fireworks. So with the that it would be leaving the code as is in regard to section 17C 230E. And so with that piece being removed or reverted back to the original language, that would remove the requirement for setting an effective date, since that was the only portion of the original proposal that was subject to that 1 year waiting period pursuant to RCW.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Krueger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I didn't see that in the packet, but I'm interested to know what the expectations are of the damages that could be done by offering an extra hour of sales of legal product to the community, to be against something that is still less onerous than what the state allows for.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Krueger. And I just want to first say that the rest of the bill that you proposed, I'm fully supportive of in regards to enabling our fire marshal to deal with the permits. And, I passed all that by our local fire departments as well. So I really appreciate the thought behind that. In regards to the hours, I just don't think it's necessary to extend by an additional hour. And from what I hear from my constituents heavily every year, I mean, throughout the year, but especially as we get closer to 4th of July, are concerns about fireworks regardless. So for me to vote, even if it's not a huge deal in any way that expands firework sales, of anything, I just can't do it. So I'm definitely a no. And, a lot of the fireworks stands are staffed by young people. And I just think 8 o'clock is plenty late. And, that's just my stand on this. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Herrera.
Thank you, Chair. It's good to talk about it here in this committee on it. I think it's important to realize who's utilizing this. We just saw executive orders from DC on slowing down and stopping some of these grants to a lot of nonprofits. Nonprofits, there's some nonprofits out there that do not receive federal funding, and the only way they raise money is through fireworks sales or other means to raise money on their own without getting a handout from the federal government. So as many nonprofits use this, I think extending 1 hour increases their availability of making money on their own, not accepting money from the federal government or anything like that. And we want to make sure, because over the years, if any of us have worked in nonprofits, the tools that may have used in the past to raise money have been more restricted. It's harder to make money for nonprofits to do good out in our communities and to be viable when the government fails in providing funding. We still want these nonprofits to do good stuff in our community. So I think this is having that extra hour is just a little bit more cushion. I think the state is a little bit. They can go to 10, I think, or something like that. And this is still lower than what the state standard is. So just a little food for thought of who's using this. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you for the comments. And we'll remember, we're going to try not to debate during study session, but we weren't debating, in my opinion, and I let it go, but just, it was walking a fine line. So for all of us. So other questions about the amendments or anything else, Ms. Kelly, that we need to be aware of? No. Okay. So talk to Councilmembers Krueger or Denson if you have questions about these, and Ms. Kelly. Any other amendments or that we need to discuss? Okay. That brings us to grant applications. Mr. Roki.
Thank you, Chair Hitchin, Paul Boki, Council staff. We have 2 grants today. The first is the 2025 Community Wildfire Defense Grant. It is a federal grant, but it comes through the Washington State Department of Natural Resources. The due date of the application is the end of February. This project seeks to reduce wildfire risks in underserved rural communities of Pierce County. Rural areas face increased vulnerability due to dense vegetation, limited emergency response access, and proximity to forested lands. By implementing targeted fuel reduction strategies, the project aims to protect lives, homes, critical infrastructure, and natural resources while fostering community awareness and preparedness. The project seeks to decrease wildfire intensity and spread by reducing fuel loads in high-risk areas and establishing defensible spaces around homes and critical infrastructure, enhancing community preparedness through education and outreach. The grant amount is $412,500. It'll be received over a period of 5 years. The match amount is $137,500. Now, I would note to the council at the top of page 2 that the department is, Pierce County is eligible for a cost share waiver. But if a cost share waiver is not approved, the Department of Emergency Management would not accept award of the grant. So that's something you might also want to discuss. Mr. John Holdsworth and Ms. Ellen Link from our Emergency Management Department are on the line to speak to this and answer your questions.
Thank you for the overview. I'll start with staff if you have anything to add, Mr. Holdsworth, and then we'll see if my colleagues have questions.
Yeah, I think just one thing to add from our side, as was mentioned, it would be for fuel reduction. And so this would be work that was done on both public and private land in coordination with our fire districts and the property owners. This is a pretty standard practice for fuel reduction activities under this grant program and under best practices, and would be implemented in coordination with our agencies that have sat through and participated on our community wildfire protection plan process. But I'm happy to answer any additional questions.
Thank you for that. I do see a question from Councilmember Morrell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To the department, is this the first time you've applied for this grant or this type of grant?
It is not. We applied probably back in 2022 for a planning component of this grant program. So this grant program is split into two pieces. One is planning, developing the community wildfire protection plan, and the other is project-based. So implementing strategies generally for fuel reduction activities, mitigation activities. We applied for the planning grant program and were not successful. And so in the beginning of the end of 2023 and the beginning of 2024, we started down a process for doing a community wildfire protection plan without the assistance of the CWDG grant. And so our application today is to implement strategies that were identified in the hazard mitigation plan, as well as have been identified in the CWPP, the Community Wildfire Protection Plan process for our communities.
Okay, thank you for that update. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for the questions. Councilmember Krueger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm trying to navigate all of the different pots of money that are for wildfire. It seems I just spoke with a couple that has like a pilot project, $1 million in doing something with wildfire in the districts, I believe in 7, 1, and 3. And then I look at this and then I understand there is the what's it called? The wildfire, the other federal.
Urban interface, the wildfire urban interface.
Well, yeah, but the Firewise, I mean, that's a whole, like a UN program that is around the world as well. And so how many, are there duplications here? How are we navigating and not stepping on each other's toes with all the different agencies?
Yeah, that's a great question. So our community wildfire protection planning group is made up of most all of the partner agencies that are involved in the various funding programs that I'm aware of. So we have representative from the Forest Service, from Department of Natural Resources. We have our local fire districts, the health department, who has some grant programs related to wildfire smoke, the conservation district, which has in partnership with the fire districts, implements the Wildfire Ready Neighbor program and the Firewise program. And so that group really works collaboratively to identify areas for collaboration, as well as to reduce that duplication of effort. And so we feel like we've been pretty successful in those efforts and supportive. There's been some other grant programs under the Department of Interior that we've utilized that group to get that information out to applicable fire districts.
Okay, well, thank you, Chair.
Thank you for the question. Any other questions from my colleagues? Not seeing any. I have a question, Mr. Halsworth, about the comment around the cost share waiver. Is it typical that if there's a cost share waiver that we say, no, we will not accept the funds if we don't get it?
Thank you for that question. Our fiscal program manager, Ellen Link, is on the line, and let Ellen answer that question.
Okay. You're muted, Miss Link.
Apologize for that. In this case, no, we don't often take this approach. We usually are able to gather up enough match to meet those obligations. We're stretched on our match, and so John did a lot of research on the probability of receiving that waiver, had some historical information that because of the communities that he's focused on, we have a relatively good likelihood to be able to receive that waiver. If we can't, and we will be, like, we're being transparent here, we'll also be transparent on our application, that if we don't receive that waiver, we won't be able to accept the award.
Okay. Thank you. I feel like I hadn't seen that before, so that was why I was wondering. Councilmember Krueger.
Thank you, Chair. I apologize. As soon as I said no, I thought of something. And I just was wondering, are any of these programs about reducing the fire load that is on the grounds of the forests?
Yes, so a big component of this will be reducing and implementing mechanical treatment. So the reduction of fuel that's on the forest ground or the thinning of trees. The other component is building in that defensible space around structures and both residences and around critical infrastructure.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Otherwise, this will be on our consent agenda. I'm not seeing any. Okay. Looks like we'll move forward with that one. And then we had a second one.
Thank you, Chair Hitchin. The second one is from Planning and Public Works, Sustainable Resources Division Solid Waste Program. And this is a formula grant. So this is one the council just needs to approve. It is, and we rush this on because the due date is next Wednesday, I believe. And the local solid waste financial assistance grant program allocates money to Washington state counties for the use in solid waste planning, implementation, and enforcement. Pierce County has been a recipient of this grant from the Department of Ecology every cycle since 1988. So it goes back a ways. This grant will be used to offset operating expenses for the household hazardous waste program and implementing the contamination re-education and outreach plan. The reason for not including this as a budgeted revenue is that the amount of funding available is dependent on the approved state budget that is developed after the county's budget process. The grant amount is $1,229,917. It's for fiscal years 25 to 27, so it's a 2-year grant. The match amount is $307,479. That will come out of the Solid Waste Management Fund, which is an enterprise fund. So with that, we have Chris Brown is on the line to answer your questions.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Boki. Mr. Brown, anything to add before we see if anyone has questions?
No.
Okay. Councilmember Krueger.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Brown, the first part I understand it was for the household hazardous waste so that folks have a place to take that. What was the second part to that? Training or
This,
something?
this, yeah, the second part is for our contamination reduction and outreach plan, which is part of our solid and hazardous waste management plan. It's basically our way of trying to educate on how to reduce contamination and recycling.
Can you give me a story on that, or what, a day in the life of doing that outreach?
Yeah, so for this particular grant, we primarily use this as one of the funding mechanisms for our Earth Matters newsletter that goes out to all the households in Pierce County. And within there, we have kind of that recycling menu, as well as different ways that people can make sure that they're putting the right things in their recycle carts, that they are doing that in a way that gives us the best materials possible.
So isn't that message rather redundant as far as with what the LRI puts out, or Murray's, or whomever is doing that? So we're looking at almost $700,000 a year for the 2 years to do outreach on hazardous waste and the newsletter?
Well, not so much outreach on the hazardous waste. That's paying for the actual program that we pull all of that in. And I would say about 90% of what's there goes towards that. The remainder goes towards the basically our newsletter and any efforts towards the recycling aspect of things.
Okay.
Outside of household hazardous waste.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for the questions and clarification. Councilmember Ayala.
Hi, thank you, Chair. I was wondering, you mentioned about 10% of that would go to the newsletter and other items. How are you tracking success, or what does success of this looks like? And are there opportunities to pivot strategies?
So we primarily use a survey of sorts, whether it's within the actual newsletter, or if it's in the classes that are coming from that. That's how we really gauge the effectiveness of that. And we are open to pivoting to, a different method if that makes more sense.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the questions. Any other questions from my colleagues? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Brown. This will be on our consent agenda tomorrow. That brings us to item number 4, which is a review of committee meetings, and committees are starting up.
They are, yes. So this afternoon, first meeting of the year for the CDEC. There are 3 discussion items on your agenda there. The first is a long-range planning division work program that will be with Planning and Public Works staff. Next, you have the 2025 draft committee work plan discussion, and that will be with Mr. Kruger from our staff here. And then the last item is the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan presented with Parks and Recreation staff. Tomorrow, beginning at 9:30, you have a Health and Human Services Committee meeting. There's 1 proposal and 1 discussion item. The proposal is R 2024-253, and this is accepting the 2024 Affordable Rental Housing NOFA funding recommendations and approving certain expenditures of funds. This has a February 11th final hearing date. And then you have the 2025 committee work plan presentation, topics and ideas discussion. At noon tomorrow is your regular Tuesday study session. In addition to your usual agenda items, you have 1 item under chair's topics, and that is the upcoming training opportunities. And then under other business, you do have an executive session, and there are a couple of matters to discuss during that. And then at 3 p.m. is your regular council meeting, and that is your meeting scheduled for the remainder of this week.
Thank you for that. There's no amendments to any of our committee schedules. So any questions on the rest of this week's meetings? Seeing none, we'll go to number 5, discussion of administrative items. Mr. Taylor.
Yes, thank you. Just 2 items, just updates for the council. One is in regard to the clerk to the council recruitment and hiring process. The interview panel will be meeting on this week, February 6th, to interview a number of candidates. So that's moving forward according to plan. And then the next item I'd like to just mention is the summer intern. So council, like in the prior 2 years, will have an intern this summer. It'll be self-funded, but it'll be part of the cohort that the Human Resources Department manages for the county. I know that the interns that the council has hosted in the prior 2 years have really benefited from the experience. It's really helped them move forward with their careers and help them kind of solidify their interests. And the council's also received benefit from the interns as well. And so we'll be hosting an intern again this summer in the human services space is where that intern will be working. So that's what I have for you in terms of administrative updates.
Thank you for that. Any questions for Mr. Taylor? Seeing none, we are at other business. I don't have anything specific. I have my topics tomorrow. Is there anything that from Ms. Long or any of my colleagues? Okay, well, seeing none, we are adjourned.